So if capitalism is driving everyone to make a profit and we all save a bit of that profit and therefore accumulate more wealth, does that mean everyone can be better off if we all run profitable businesses? So does that mean Boris Johnson's idea of levelling up is a good one? Or is there a limit to how much wealth there is? Today we look at the difference between profit and accumulation, and what exactly are the limits, where are they, and why? That's today on the Debunking Economics podcast with Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie. Thanks for joining us. So when you think about it, if there's a limited supply of money or a set amount of money and somebody is accumulating large parts of it, then doesn't that mean less for everyone else? And yet capitalism is based on being incentivized to make a profit. And so does that mean that you are making that profit and then saving it? Last time we talked about whether in Boris Johnson's world of levelling up, you'll remember we talked about whether someone can actually make gains without impacting others. And a couple of listeners have asked about this idea. How can net profits occur in a fixed supply world, but not net accumulation unless you are acquiring other people's wealth? So everyone can't save, in other words. So, Steve, explain a bit about this.
Yeah, that's what I call an open invitation.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? There we are. And I'll see you at the end. I'll be back in half an hour to wrap up.
Get a cup of coffee. You can send me the cup of coffee you don't drink. You can send it to me electronically. Yeah, I mean it's one of these things which happens so frequently. Actually, I'll start off with a line about you know that I got hammered by a guy called Rory Robinson back in Australia for about house prices, don't you? Okay. Well,
of course.
Yeah. Okay. Now, in the middle, this is. I think it was before the financial crisis. Might have been after. But I ended up on a panel with Guy Debelle, who was one of the deputy governors of the Bank of the Reserve Bank of Australia, and just missed out on getting the top job later. And we had a bit of a chat, and he's a personable bloke. He's the sort of bloke you wouldn't mind inviting over for a game of backyard cricket, that sort of person. But anyway, he said, I don't know why you go on about the debt to GDP ratio, meaning private debt, of course, in my case, because you're comparing a stock to a flow. Now, I didn't feel like saying, well, that's brain dead stupid. You want me to explain why you're wrong? I just basically nodded. And then the next day in the Financial Review, I think it was, there's Rory saying Keane is making a schoolboy error of comparing a stock to a flow. And I went, I just had enough of this. So I wrote a little article called Rory Robinson Designs a Car. And this is back in the days when EVs weren't even on the horizon. You still had hybrids. And so I had him inventing the world's fastest hybrid car by taking his knowledge from economics that you shouldn't make stock flow comparisons, and telling the engineers building the car that they should make no stock flow comparisons when they designed the car. So the chief engineer of the company, whose name was Dr. Strangelove, managed to design the world's fastest hybrid vehicle. And the reason it was so fast was the petrol tank held 1 litre of petrol, which meant you had to go to the petrol station every 30 kilometres to refuel. But that's fine because you weren't making a stock flow comparison, and the stock is you weren't comparing the stock of petrol you had to the flow of petrol needed by this hybrid vehicle. Now that's a long-winded way to say that stock flow comparisons matter, but economists stuff them up all the time. They don't understand it at all. And
it's intrinsic to money supply is the speed of the circulation of money, and that's what.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah. And so this is the point. When people think about profit, they think, even like this happens all the time, and particularly people think they're radical critics of the banking sector, make this mistake all the time. They say that when you borrow $100 from the bank, and the bank charges you 5% interest, then they're giving you 100 and they want 105 back. So therefore you've got to borrow more money the next time round and more money, and this is a fundamental flaw that's going to cause the banking system to collapse. Well, it's just as wrong as Rory Robinson's stuff about stock flow comparisons, because, and this is the point I try to make in a new cartoon, which actually starts being published, I think, in the next week or two, called Funny Money. But the point is that profit is a flow. It is not a stock. So if you borrow, and this is the way that I explain it very, very briefly to people, when I've got two paragraphs to get the point through. If you borrow $100 from a bank, and they charge you 5% interest, that means you have to pay them $5 per year on that outstanding $100. Now, if you borrowed $100 and you hire some people and you manage to turn over, have a business that turns over $200 per year, and you've got to pay your workers $160 per year of that, and you pay the bank $5 per year on the interest of the borrowing of 100, you've got 35 spare, which is your profit per year. So profit is a flow, and it's quite feasible to have positive profits indefinitely from a fixed amount of money turning over indefinitely, just as it's quite possible to pay debt on outstanding loans indefinitely if the money turns over fast enough. I mean, after you've paid so that's the basic point.
So the fact you've borrowed that money, which is new money, of course. If you've borrowed it from the bank, that's new money that's been created, and then you are putting it to good use by circulating it quickly because you're employing people, and then they're spending their money and so forth.
Yeah.
So your profit comes out of that, but you still have money left to pay the interest back to the bank at the end of the day.
That's right, and that's why most business loans they're not ones you've got to pay back at some point in the future. They're rollover loans, and so again, this is one of the reasons people get confused. I think because when you take out a mortgage as an individual buying a house, then you agree to pay both the interest and the principal back. And people then cloud the two in their minds. But when you take out a business loan, you might borrow, let's say you borrow, say $330,000 from a bank to build a set of storage sheds. Then you would quite sensibly hang on to that debt of $330,000. If you earn, say, $65,000 a year from the sheds, then your interest of, say 10%, or even if it was 10%, which would be actually high for a small business loan these days, that'd be $33,000. So half the money you'd make on the sheds would be paying your interest on your bank loan, but none of it paying off the principal. And you could easily sell that business sometime in the future and sell the debt with it, because it's still making that net $33,000 profit above the interest payments you have to make.
Right. And that's how people accumulate wealth, isn't it? By and large, that they build up these businesses. The businesses are worth something. So, like when we look at the richest man in Britain now is Sir Leonard Blavatnik, who, you probably never even heard of, but he's worth...
You're dead right. Can you pronounce that last name very carefully?
Blavatnik. He's worth £23 billion. He's made his money out of the music industry, and he streams boxing events and all that sort of stuff. But...
okay.
That's his net worth, of course. But he spends that money as well. He's got a very nice boat, so people are being employed making his boat, for example. I've seen a photograph of him in a nice suit, so keeping the clothing industry going as well. So his money isn't sitting idly by. I mean, he's investing it. He's buying stuff with it. So there's a difference, though, isn't there? So there's the money he's invested in stocks and shares. So his accumulated wealth is sitting there in stocks and shares, and then there's money he's spending, which is not accumulating, which is helping the economy go down. That old trickle-down thing, Steve, that is so popular. So what about this accumulation of wealth, though? When you've got someone like that who's made the profit, through the process that you've described, and he's carried on doing that, and he's got these businesses which he can sell, which is all still good news. But what about the stuff that is just sitting in stocks and shares? That's not so good. That is damaging. That is not leveling up.
This is actually an area that I'm still working on building in the capacity to model in my Minsky software, because the way I've designed Minsky, which is the way that I model financial dynamics, is that everything is either your claim on somebody else or somebody else's claim on you. So if your asset, for example, if you're a bank, then one of your assets is the mortgage that you've taken out to buy your home. So it's a liability for you as a home buyer, but an asset for the bank. And you add up all the assets and liabilities, because it's adding up claims on other people and other people's claims on other people. The sum is zero. So that's what we call financial assets. But what we're looking at as well as non-financial assets, and this is where things get curly, because think about the house. If you buy a house, then yes, the mortgage you've got on that house is your liability and somebody else's asset. But the
value is very different. Yeah.
Yeah, the value. Yeah, the house itself is your asset. Is it anybody else's liability? No, it's not. So it's what's known as a non-financial asset. I have to say that I became aware of this when I started trying to draft the housing policy for the political party I'm standing for at the next Australian election, the New Liberals. because I needed to include people's housing assets as part of their net worth. So they've got a bank account and they've got superannuation, let's say, and they've also got a house. And I thought, well, the superannuation is their asset and it's the liability of the superannuation company. The bank deposit is their asset and the liability of the bank. The house is their asset, but whose liability is it? The answer is nobody's. So what you have to do, and we're just redesigning...
Until you sell it.
Well, no, it becomes somebody else's asset, but nobody's liability.
Well, as usual, we break into this discussion just as it starts to get interested. To tell you that if you want to hear it in full, you need to become a subscriber at debunkingeconomics.com or a supporter of Steve Keen on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Prof. Steve Keen. If you subscribe or support, then you can get access to this podcast in full and all the other ones. 260 or so now, I think we've got. And you can listen to them all in full if you subscribe. We'll catch you again next week. See you then. Thanks for listening.